April 15, 1968. The Kremlin, Moscow. In a secure wood-paneled office deep within the nerve center of the Soviet Union, Admiral of the Fleet Sergei Gorshkov reviews a final, deeply frustrating report. For over a month, the full might of the Soviet Pacific Fleet has been engaged in a desperate, frantic search. Dozens of warships, auxiliary vessels, and long-range aircraft have crisscrossed more than 1 million square miles of the unforgiving North Pacific. They were hunting for a ghost. Their ghost had a name, K-129, a Project 629, a ballistic missile submarine. On February 24th, the submarine, carrying 3 nuclear-armed R-21 missiles and a crew of 98, had departed its home port of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky on a routine combat patrol. It was scheduled to check in by radio in mid-March. It never did. The silence was absolute. The search operation was a colossal failure. The vast, churning expanse of the Pacific had simply swallowed one of the Soviet Navy's most potent weapons. Now, Admiral Gorshkov and the Politburo were forced to accept a bitter reality. The K-129 and its crew were lost, gone. But within this strategic failure, there was a kernel of cold comfort, a certainty born from the unforgiving laws of physics. Soviet naval intelligence estimated the submarine lay somewhere on the abyssal plain, a crushing depth of at least 16,000 feet, nearly 3 miles straight down. At that depth, the water pressure exceeds 7,000 pounds per square inch. It was a pressure vessel designed for the depths, but its crush depth was a fraction of that. The hull would have imploded with unimaginable violence. The conclusion in Moscow was therefore simple and absolute. Whatever secrets K-129 held, its code books, its acoustic signature technology, its nuclear-tipped missiles, were now entombed forever. They were locked in a vault of water and pressure so immense, so final, that no nation on Earth possessed the technology to reach them. The ocean floor was the ultimate security blanket. The sub and its secrets were safe. The loss was a tragedy, but it was a Soviet tragedy, and theirs alone. The Americans, their great Cold War adversary, would never know where it was, and even if by some miracle they did, they would be powerless to touch it. This was not a matter of opinion or ideology. It was a matter of engineering and physics. It was an immutable fact. That iron certainty, held in the highest echelons of the Soviet state, was a catastrophic miscalculation. Because while Admiral Gorshkov's fleet was chasing phantom signals across the Pacific, another, far more sophisticated system was listening. Not with ships, but with a web of microphones laid across the entire ocean floor. This was the U.S. Navy's Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS. A top-secret network of underwater hydrophones originally designed to detect Soviet submarines, it also had the ability to hear other things. And in early March 1968, multiple SOSUS arrays detected a faint but clear acoustic event northwest of Hawaii, a series of pops and rumbles consistent with a catastrophic deep ocean implosion. While the Soviets searched in the wrong place, thousands of miles away, American intelligence analysts at the Naval Intelligence Processing Center in Maryland were cross-referencing the SOSUS data. They triangulated the signal, pinpointing a potential wreck site to a search box of just 5 square miles. The Soviets had a 1 million square mile haystack and no needle. The Americans had the needle's exact coordinates. The Kremlin's immutable fact was about to be shattered by an American reality they could not even conceive of. They believed their submarine was lost forever, protected by the very laws of nature. They were about to learn that the Central Intelligence Agency was willing and able to bend those laws through sheer force of will, ingenuity, and a budget that defied belief. The Soviets saw an impossible problem. The CIA saw the intelligence opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to seize the enemy's most precious secrets from the bottom of the sea. They were going to steal a Soviet nuclear submarine right from under the Kremlin's nose, and to do it, they would partner with America's most eccentric billionaire to build a ship that had no business existing. This is the story of Project Azorian, the most audacious and technologically daring covert operation of the Cold War. It's the story of how the CIA built a multi-billion-dollar cover story involving a reclusive genius and a fake deep-sea mining operation to physically hoist a piece of the Soviet soul from the darkest, most inaccessible corner of the planet. The first step was to confirm the target. Pinpointing the location was one thing, seeing it was another. In the summer of 1968, the U.S. Navy dispatched the USS Halibut, a unique submarine outfitted for deep-sea espionage. The Halibut was a marvel of covert technology, trailing a 2-ton remote-controlled vehicle nicknamed the Fish. This submersible, packed with powerful strobe lights and high-resolution cameras, was towed on a 20,000-foot cable. For weeks, the Halibut meticulously mowed the lawn, sweeping back and forth over the 5-square-mile patch of ocean floor identified by SOSUS. The crew worked in grueling 18-hour shifts, staring at grainy black-and-white video feeds, hoping for a sign. Finally, after more than 2 months of searching, a shape materialized from the murky darkness. It was a submarine sail, twisted and broken. Then, other pieces of debris. They had found it. The K-129 lay shattered on the seabed, 16,500 feet below the surface. The photographs taken by the Halibut's fish were stark, ghostly, and absolutely electrifying to the intelligence community. They confirmed the location and the condition of the wreck. Now came the impossible question: how in the world do you retrieve it? The question landed with the weight of an entire ocean on the desks of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. It wasn't a matter of if they should recover the K-129, but how. The intelligence prize was simply too great to ignore. Inside that shattered hull lay the keys to the Soviet kingdom, their nuclear missile technology, cryptographic equipment and codebooks, and sonar and acoustic operating manuals. Capturing this material would be like being handed the enemy's playbook in the middle of the Super Bowl. It would give the United States an unprecedented advantage in the undersea shadow war. The question landed with the weight of an entire ocean on the desks of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. It wasn't a matter of if they should recover the K-129, but how. The intelligence prize was simply too great to ignore. Inside that shattered hull lay the keys to the Soviet kingdom, their nuclear missile technology, cryptographic equipment and codebooks, and sonar and acoustic operating manuals. Capturing this material would be like being handed the enemy's playbook in the middle of the Super Bowl. It would give the United States an unprecedented advantage in the undersea shadow war. Early concepts bordered on the absurd. One idea involved using giant pontoons filled with a buoyant, lighter-than-water petroleum gas, which would be pumped down to the wreck, attached, and then used to float the submarine section to the surface. It was deemed far too complex and dangerous. The consensus quickly formed around a single, brutally direct concept: a mechanical lift. They would build a giant, powerful claw, lower it 3 miles on a steel cable, grab the submarine, and haul it up. But this presented an even bigger problem: secrecy. A massive naval salvage operation in the middle of the Pacific, staying in one spot for weeks, would be impossible to hide. Soviet spy trawlers, reconnaissance planes, and satellites would spot it immediately. The mission would be compromised before the claw even touched the seafloor. They needed a disguise, a cover story so plausible, so public, and so mind-bogglingly expensive that no one would ever suspect the truth. This was the true genius of what would become Project Azorian. The operation couldn't be hidden, so they would hide it in plain sight. They would invent an entire industry. In the late 1960s, a new and exciting field of commercial exploration was emerging: deep-sea mining. The abyssal plains of the world's oceans were known to be littered with so-called manganese nodules, potato-sized rocks rich in manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt. The technology to harvest them was still theoretical, but corporations were beginning to invest billions in the idea. The CIA decided it would join the deep-sea mining business. They would build the world's most advanced deep ocean mining vessel, a ship so large and sophisticated it would make headlines. And for that, they needed the perfect frontman, someone whose wealth, ambition, and well-known eccentricities would make such a venture seem not just possible, but logical. They needed someone who was already a major defense contractor, someone accustomed to secrecy, and someone whose name alone would lend an air of futuristic legitimacy to the project. They needed Howard Hughes. By the 1970s, Hughes was a recluse, but his empire, Hughes Tool Company, was a powerhouse of engineering innovation. Through a series of clandestine meetings in smoke-filled hotel rooms, CIA officials, led by the legendary John Parangosky, pitched the idea to Hughes's top executives. The U.S. government wanted to commission a ship, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, under the public guise of a multi-billion-dollar effort to mine manganese nodules from the seabed. In reality, the ship would be a purpose-built covert recovery platform, owned and operated by the CIA. Hughes, intrigued by the sheer audacity and patriotic nature of the mission, agreed. The stage was now set for the most elaborate deception in maritime history. The ship itself was an engineering marvel, a vessel designed to perform a mission that bordered on science fiction. Constructed in total secrecy at the Sun Shipbuilding Yard in Pennsylvania, the Hughes Glomar Explorer was 619 feet long and weighed over 50,000 tons. It wasn't a ship so much as a floating, self-propelled surgical instrument. At its center was a massive derrick, similar to an oil rig, capable of supporting immense weight. But its real secret was hidden from view. Beneath the derrick was the feature that made the entire operation possible, the moon pool. This was a cavernous, 200-foot by 74-foot opening in the center of the ship's hull, which could be opened and closed to the sea by a pair of massive, submersible gates. The moon pool allowed the ship's most critical piece of equipment to be assembled, lowered, and retrieved completely underwater, shielded from the prying eyes of Soviet satellites. That piece of equipment was the capture vehicle, a monstrous 8-fingered claw officially named the capture vehicle, but known to its creators as Clementine. This was the business end of the operation, a 415-ton grappling machine designed to descend to the seabed, align itself over the wrecked submarine using powerful thrusters and sonar, and gently but firmly grasp the targeted section of the hull. Clementine would then be raised inch by agonizing inch, carrying its precious cargo up into the watery embrace of the moon pool, where the prize could finally be brought inside the ship and hidden forever from the outside world. The entire project, from the ship's construction to the mission's execution, would cost the American taxpayer an estimated $800 million in 1974 dollars, the equivalent of nearly $5 billion today. It was and remains one of the most expensive single intelligence operations ever attempted, all for one roll of the dice, one chance to pull a secret from the abyss while the world and the Soviets watched a cover story about mining rocks from the ocean floor. On June 20, 1974, after years of clandestine design and construction, the Hughes Glomar Explorer slipped its moorings and sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge, heading for the open Pacific. To the public, it was the dawn of a new era in commercial enterprise, a bold venture by the visionary Howard Hughes to unlock the mineral wealth of the deep ocean. News articles celebrated its innovative design. Its true purpose was known to only a few hundred individuals in the world. Its destination, a desolate patch of water designated Point Nemo, 1,570 miles northwest of Hawaii. The journey to the recovery site took weeks. Once on station, the real work began. The crew, a mix of seasoned sailors, roughnecks from the oil drilling industry, and hand-picked CIA technical officers, commenced the most complex and delicate phase of the operation, assembling and lowering the 3-mile-long pipe string that would carry Clementine to the seabed. This wasn't a simple cable. It was a string of 60-foot sections of high-strength steel pipe, each one meticulously added by the giant derrick, threaded, and torqued into place. Every single connection had to be perfect. A single flaw in the metallurgy, one cross-threaded joint, could cause the entire 3-mile-long string to snap, sending the multi-million-dollar capture vehicle plummeting into the abyss and ending the mission in catastrophic failure. Day after day, the derrick crew worked in a slow, brutal rhythm. Hoist, connect, lower. Hoist, connect, lower. The pipe string descended deeper and deeper into the crushing darkness, a fragile steel thread connecting the world of sunlight and air to the silent alien world below. Deep inside the ship's control room, the atmosphere was electric. Engineers and CIA officers huddled around sonar screens and low-light video monitors, their faces illuminated by the green glow of the displays. They were the first human eyes to see this part of the world in real time. They watched as Clementine, its powerful thrusters firing in short bursts to maintain position, slowly descended through the last 100 feet of water. And then, there it was. Emerging from the gloom, the ghostly, broken shape of the K-129. But they were not alone. The Kremlin, while completely ignorant of the operation's true nature, was deeply suspicious. The location of this supposed deep-sea mining operation was suspiciously close to the patrol route of their lost submarine. Soviet intelligence dispatched spy ships to investigate. The first to arrive was the Soviet missile range instrumentation ship Chazma, followed later by the naval tug SB-10. These ships would park just a few miles off the Glomar explorer's beam, bristling with antennas and surveillance equipment, watching every move. Soviet helicopters buzzed overhead, their crews taking photographs. The CIA's cover story was now being tested in real time. The American crew played their part to perfection. They went about their mining operations. They even broadcast messages in the clear, complaining about equipment malfunctions related to their mining scoop. They knew the Soviets were listening to every word. It was a masterful piece of theater, a multi-billion-dollar poker game being played in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The Soviets saw a strange, ambitious mining vessel. They couldn't see the submarine being prepared for its final ascent from within the ship's hidden belly. After days of careful positioning, the moment of truth arrived. The controllers in the Glomar Explorer delicately maneuvered the massive claw over the forward section of the K-129. With agonizing slowness, the 8 hydraulic fingers closed, gripping the battered Soviet hull. Strain gauges and sensors relayed the information back to the surface. The grip was firm. They had it. The order was given to begin the lift. The massive hydraulic winches on the Glomar began to turn, pulling up the pipe string foot by foot. For 8 days, the ascent continued. The weight on the derrick was immense, over 1,900 tons of dead weight being drawn up from the abyss. Everything was holding. Inside the control room, the tension gave way to a palpable sense of awe and impending triumph. They were actually doing it. They were pulling off the impossible. The K-129 section was now just a mile below the surface, and then disaster struck. Without warning, a series of loud cracks echoed through the ship's hull, transmitted up the steel pipe string from the depths below. On the monitors, the engineers watched in horror as several of Clementine's fingers suddenly broke away. The claw had suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The damaged hull of the K-129, weakened by the initial implosion and the immense stresses of the lift, couldn't take the strain. A massive 2/3 of their prize, including the most critical sections containing the missile silos and the code room, tore away from the claw's grasp. It twisted in the black water for a moment, a dying leviathan, and then began its final silent 3-mile plunge back to the ocean floor, lost forever. In the control room, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of curses and groans of disbelief. Years of work, billions of dollars, the prize of a lifetime. And most of it had just vanished. All they were left with was a 38-foot forward section. The heart of the submarine, the intelligence they coveted most, was gone. The greatest heist in history had partially failed at the last possible second. A funereal quiet descended upon the Hughes Glomar Explorer. The elation of the past week evaporated, replaced by the bitter taste of partial and very public failure. But the mission wasn't over. They still had something. The mangled 38-foot forward section of the K-129 was carefully, almost reverently, lifted from Clementine's remaining grip and brought into the vast, shielded hangar of the moon pool. As the massive doors sealed them off from the outside world, the CIA's recovery team got their first look at their prize. It was a scene of utter devastation. The steel hull was twisted and ripped like paper. Inside, the torpedo room was a mangled wreck, but amidst the wreckage, there were items of immense intelligence value. They recovered 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes, providing American analysts with their first-ever direct look at the design and yield of Soviet submarine-launched tactical nuclear weapons. They found fragments of sonar equipment and other acoustic devices that would help the U.S. Navy better understand how to track and identify Soviet subs. But they also found something else. Within the wreckage, the recovery team discovered the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. This was no longer just a technical intelligence operation, it was now a human one. The CIA, in a moment that stands in stark contrast to the ruthless pragmatism of the Cold War, decided to do the honorable thing. They meticulously recovered the bodies. A full military funeral was prepared. The crew of the Glomar explorer assembled on deck. A CIA official, reading from a prepared text, translated into Russian, conducted a formal burial at sea. "We commit their bodies to the deep," the official intoned, as the flag-draped biers were slid into the Pacific, in recognition of their service to the Soviet state. The entire ceremony was filmed on a 16mm camera. The agency knew that one day the truth might come out, and they wanted proof that they had treated their fallen adversaries with respect. This film would remain one of the CIA's most closely guarded secrets for decades. With the partial prize secured and the solemn duty discharged, the Glomar explorer headed home. Project Azorian was officially over, or so the CIA thought. The problem with a cover story as massive and expensive as a fake deep-sea mining venture is that it leaves a very large footprint. And in June 1974, just as the Glomar explorer was setting sail, a group of thieves broke into the Los Angeles headquarters of the Summa Corporation, Howard Hughes' company. They weren't looking for state secrets, they were looking for cash. But in a safe, they found a series of memos that cryptically referred to Project J and its connection to the CIA. The thieves, seeing an opportunity, tried to ransom the documents back to the CIA. The agency refused to play ball. Slowly, inevitably, the story began to leak. Reporters started sniffing around. The Los Angeles Times got a significant tip and started preparing a story. The CIA, in a desperate bid to keep the operation secret, not least because they still hoped to go back and recover the rest of the sub, managed to convince editors to hold the story, arguing it would cause a major international incident with the Soviet Union. But the secret was too big to hold. In February 1975, investigative journalist Jack Anderson broke the first part of the story on national radio. Then, on March 18, 1975, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh published a comprehensive, detailed exposé on the front page of the New York Times. The cover was blown completely and irrevocably. Project Azorian was now public knowledge. The world now knew about the CIA's audacious plan to steal a Soviet submarine, and more importantly, so did the Soviets. The revelation sent a profound shockwave through the Kremlin and the headquarters of Soviet naval intelligence. For 7 years, they had believed their submarine was resting peacefully, its secrets safe, in an untouchable oceanic grave. Now they were confronted with a truth that was almost impossible to process. The Americans hadn't just found it. They had built a phantom ship, invented a fake industry, and physically reached down 3 miles to try and snatch it right from under them. The psychological impact was immense. It was a violation on a scale they had never imagined. Their most secure fortress, the deep ocean, had been breached. The official Soviet response was one of studied, theatrical outrage. The Foreign Ministry lodged a formal protest about American naval activities. Soviet newspapers denounced the imperialist plunderers of the sea and the ghoulish CIA. But this was all public posturing, a performance for the international stage. Behind the fortified walls of the Kremlin and the Lubyanka, the mood was not one of anger, but of cold, terrifying awe. The Americans had not just outsmarted them, they had demonstrated a capability so far beyond the Soviets' own that it forced a fundamental reassessment of the technological balance of power. The internal KGB and GRU postmortems were brutal. How had they missed this? How could a 619-foot ship be built, a multi-billion-dollar project be executed, without their global intelligence network raising a single alarm? The answer was as brilliant as it was infuriating. The CIA had wrapped the truth in a lie so big, so expensive, and so public that it became invisible. The operation's very audacity had been its greatest shield. The Soviets had seen the Hughes Glomar explorer, they had photographed it, they had listened to its radio chatter. They saw exactly what the CIA wanted them to see, an eccentric billionaire's folly. They never once suspected it was a dagger aimed at the heart of their naval secrets. This single operation planted a seed of deep and lasting paranoia within the Soviet high command. If the Americans could pluck a submarine from the ocean floor, what else could they do? Were their missile silos truly secure? Were their encrypted communications really private? Every shadow now held a potential threat. Every technological gap loomed like a chasm. The Glomar explorer had done more than just lift a piece of a submarine. It had lifted the veil on a technological disparity that the Soviets could no longer ignore. Years later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the true sentiments of the Soviet military and intelligence establishment would begin to emerge in memoirs and interviews. Gone was the public bluster, replaced by a professional, almost pained, respect for what their adversaries had accomplished. The ultimate concession did not come in the form of a diplomatic note, but in the quiet, private admissions of the men who had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. One high-ranking Soviet naval officer, reflecting on the operation, was quoted by a former CIA contact as saying, "It is difficult not to express our respect for our counterparts in the U.S. Navy and CIA." From a purely technical perspective, the operation was a fantastic achievement. To build such a ship and devise such a plan, it was an undertaking of tremendous scope. We truly did not believe it was possible. This was the final unspoken truth of Project Azorian. The mission may have been a partial failure, with 2/3 of the prize lost at the last moment. This was the final unspoken truth of Project Azorian. The mission may have been a partial failure, with 2/3 of the prize lost at the last moment. But in its strategic and psychological impact, it was one of the most profound successes of the Cold War. It was a story not just of a ship, but of a system that could harness private industry, clandestine services, and limitless ambition to attempt the impossible. The Soviets believed their secrets were safe, protected by the immutable laws of physics in the deepest, darkest part of the world. They were wrong. They failed to account for the single greatest strategic asset of their adversary, a belief that the laws of physics were not a barrier, but simply an engineering problem waiting to be solved. The Kremlin learned the hardest lesson of the Cold War, that not even 3 miles of crushing, icy water could hide a secret from an enemy willing to build an entirely new reality just to come and take it.